Welcome, everybody. I'm Tracy McFadden, Director of Friends of the Morrill Homestead. And the Friends of the Morrill Homestead is a nonprofit that supports this site, bringing in programs like this and caring for the gardens and orchard and any other thing we can do to help support the site. This is a Vermont State Historic Site and also a national landmark. And it's owned and operated by the Vermont Division for Historic Preservation. And it's open for house tours Saturdays and Sundays until October 10th. And if you have not had a tour inside Senator Morrill's home, I highly recommend it. Just to learn about him and some of the innovations and unusual things that he did when he built his home, and it still has all the original furnishings and decor and art, etc. Last Sunday we had part 1 of this series with Jess Robinson, the Vermont State archaeologist, and it was recorded, and I'm close to being able to have a link to that on our website. It's been a big learning curve and I'm not quite there yet. Next Sunday is part 3 with Joseph and Jesse Bruchak. And if you're interested in that, you can register online the same way you did for this presentation. This is being recorded, and again, when I get the technology part of it straightened out, we hope to have a link to today's presentation on our website. Also, next Sunday, we will have a story time for families with Joseph and Jesse, and that is an outdoor event and will not be online. It's an in-person event for families. I would like to thank the Vermont Council on Humanities for giving us a grant to help support this and some of our other programs, and also thank Hotel Coolidge for underwriting this program. Lastly, but just as important, the bathrooms are out right across the lawn over there. And I'm excited to welcome Fred Wiseman for part 2 of our program, Vermont Abenakis Unwriting History. So thank you. Okay. Oh, I just remember one quick note. For those of you on Zoom, please keep your computers muted throughout the whole program. And when we have the discussion section at the end, you can type in your questions in the chat, and I will do my best to ask as many of them as I can. And for those of you here in person, just know that if you are talking quietly to your neighbor, everybody on Zoom will probably be able to hear you. So if we can be a quiet audience, that would be appreciated by everybody. So welcome, thank you.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Fred Wiseman. I'm the director of the Vermont Indigenous Heritage Center in the Burlington Intervale. And our goal is basically learning and teaching the Abenaki way, strictly focusing on what is indigenous to Vermont, because much of what we think about is Vermont Indigenous or Vermont Abenaki actually has a lot of roots elsewhere in other places. So the goal of the Heritage Center is to focus just on what is within the tribal territories of the 4 recognized bands, okay? And so we'll talk a little bit about those. So I'm talking today not exactly about cultural history, but biocultural history, because we're also considering agriculture and a little bit of ecology in it as well. So I want you, kind of redid the title a little bit to focus on a little bit broader than just history and culture history. Now, one of the big questions, of course, were the Abenakis. Well, the Abenakis are part of a much larger group of very closely related people called the Wabanaki. Okay, Abenaki comes from the same root as Wabanaki does, which is Wapanaukwik, the people who dwell in the land of the dawn. Okay, And there are 5 nations. The what anthropologists call the Western Abenaki, Eastern Abenaki or Penobscot, Passamaquoddies, Maliseet, and Mi'kmaq people. And so we are located just about in the westernmost part of the whole area. So one of the questions that people would always ask is, well, what is there Abenaki nation? And if so, what is it? Well, the interesting thing is that no, there is no such thing as an Abenaki nation. There are 4 individual Abenaki tribes, each of which has status of a native tribe within state law. And I'll talk a little bit about recognition and all that process. I fought for recognition from 1993 up until we got finished with in 2012. So I can go on for 20 hours on that. So I'm not putting any tribal territories in here because they're mostly, they're more ethnic rather than actually political, okay? So Missisquoi is basically up in northwestern Vermont. That is the nation that I belong to. I'm band number 2656. Milhegan is up in the northeastern part of the state, Northeast Kingdom. And below that, in the central part of the Connecticut River Valley, is the Coas or Coas Nation. And then down at the very bottom, extending into New Hampshire and down into northern Massachusetts, is the Alnu tribe. All of these have state recognition. And so the area that I'm considering is not just within the bounds of Vermont, but within the tribal territories that extend in all directions except Lake Champlain, which is known as Bedongbaguk, or the lake between the Abenakis and the Haudenosaunee Iroquois Confederacy. And so one of the questions everybody asks, well, you know, who are the Abenakis? How do we know that these people are real? I'm sure all of you are about my age and you remember the 20-year program of the state of Vermont denying that the Abenakis were cultural, political, you know, and genealogical real. So one of the things that we're asking and trying to think about throughout this whole lecture here is, you know, how does one determine an Indian or an Abenaki? And so here's what are called the 4 colonized pillars of ethnic legitimacy. These are colonized because these are determined by Euro-American people. They have nothing to do with any indigenous thing because, interestingly, Native identity is a political identity. It is not an ethnic identity. Okay. And so to be recognized, you've got to have documented genealogical descent. In other words, you can't just walk in and say, you know, I'm an Indian. All other protected minorities can do what's called self-identify. Okay, indigenous people cannot. So dogs, horses, and Native American people are the only 3 entities in the United States that have to carry a pedigree to prove that they're real. Okay, and that pedigree is usually focused on genealogical descendants. So we are nice thoroughbred horses and you know, very good breed of dogs. Then you have to have a historical evidence of Native American presence in your tribal homelands. And I brought up some artifacts here for you to look at that are appropriate to this. For example, this is a Lake Champlain Valley Abenaki quillwork pouch. Let's get it over in the zoom here. It doesn't work very well. Okay, well, Zoom people, take my word for it. This is an original quillwork pouch that was used by travelers and warriors in about 1740 to 1760. And then we have all kinds of other materials scattered around here that show that we had a deep presence in this area. We also have imagery, paintings, drawings, photographs, okay, newspaper articles. So there's a lot of that. But that's not enough. You have to prove that you're accepted by neighboring Native people as real. Okay, and that is always an interesting puzzle. Is you have to go and ask your neighbors, like the Passamaquoddies or the Penobscots, hey, are we real? Can you come and write us a letter of recommendation to the state of Vermont saying that we're real? And I actually had to go and do that. And you also have to have little evidence of cultural appropriation of core aspects of language, arts, performance, and belief. In other words, to be able to be a real tribe, you can't borrow stories from the Penobscots or Passamaquoddies. They've got to be your stories. You can't borrow dances or ceremonies from the Penobscots. They've got to be your stories. Excuse me, your dances. And so you have to document all of this. The interesting thing is that much of the performing arts that are out there have been culturally appropriated, and interestingly enough, were rejected by the Attorney General of the state of Vermont as being real. So we have to be real careful at the Heritage Center to vet everything to show that it's from within the geographic area of the tribes. And all of that led to the triumph, I guess you could say, of the Vermont recognition. This is Governor Jim Douglas signing the bill that set up the mechanism where the different tribes could apply to get their recognition. And that was a very happy day.
Can you focus that a little bit? It seemed to be a little out of focus.
Okay, let's see what we can do here. No, that's skew. Is that better? Okay, good. So here's the chiefs and me and Hinda Miller with the governor signing it. That was a real happy day. We partied quite well after that. So what I want to do is talk about the original indigenous civilization here. That really is not at all what you think it would be. And it's going to focus on what's called the Great Council Party. This is an alliance of indigenous people. The Abenakis are included. That is very, very exciting, very interesting, but nobody knows about it. Nobody cares. And so some of the interesting elements of that, we had complex subsistence systems. In other words, not just three sisters. We had everything ranging from platform, mound agriculture to agroforestry. Okay, highly sophisticated things that you would expect to find in Mexico or Guatemala. Complex material culture, we'll get into some of that. Earthworks and stone-built landscapes. Within 10 miles of here, there are about four earthwork structures, all lying above 2,000 feet, that were probably prehistoric and contact period observatories to set the calendar. Long distance travel and trade. We have in Vermont materials from Rama Bay, as far north as you can go in Labrador, and materials from Jamaica, the Queen Conch shelf. You plot that on a map, put it over in Europe and see how that compares with the empire of Alexander the Great. Okay. Ever think that we were quite so sophisticated? Complex, widespread political systems. We're going to get into that. Very complex belief systems that are based on heliocentrism. The concept of the sun and the moon and the planets are the underlying deities of creation, and a whole very interesting system. Literacy based on wampum belts, and I'm going to show you and talk a little bit about that. So when you think about a typical contact period warrior chief, what you generally think of is somebody that's pretty well stripped down, maybe has a airlock with an eagle feather in it, not much else. These are replicas that we did for the quadricentennial of leaders that are taken from Champlain's descriptions. So we talked about a panache and actually exhibited people with this very complex headdresses and porcupine quill work and all kinds of other things. So for the quad, I actually had my students at Johnson. I taught Native American studies there. For 8 years, we worked in building a complete system here for everybody to use at the quad. These are some interesting little things here. When you think about astronomy, you generally don't think about the Abenakis and their neighbors as being, astronomers. Well, this is a quote box of probably more Eastern Abenaki, but this is called Gagwit, the sun symbol. Here, there's quite, and then we have the phases of the moon and a series of constellations, all set by the way that they will rise and fall, like the zodiac. Here is a prayer that goes to the sun and the Pleiades. And this is the symbol for woman's prayer. Okay. And so this was a prayer to set the stars. And there's an old saying, all the stars have names. So when we think about the simplistic models that we have of what, the stories and things like that, what we have, this is what we really have. Most important of this is the political union of the Great Council Fire. We tend to think of the Native people as being politically unsophisticated, except for the Iroquois Confederacy. Okay, that's the only group that you've ever heard of that can field a large army, was politically organized with systems. Well, that is not at all true. This is Chief Pasaki of the Kiskatan Adawa opening the Great Peace of Montreal in 1701, where the Great Council Fire achieved a lasting peace with the Haudenosaunee, or Iroquois Confederacy. So if you want to see the difference between what everybody thinks is the biggest empire in the East versus the totally unknown Great Council Fire, here's the Iroquois Confederacy territory. This is the Great Council Fire. From the Cape Breton Island to the shadow of the Rockies. Now, the big question is, why? Doesn't anybody know of that? Maybe some of you that know your history, when in the Battle of Lake George, there were 14 nations, including the Menominee, Adawas, Mississaugas. What were they doing over here helping the Abenakis keep the Brits from coming up? From
point, yes, they were.
Because they were all part of the alliance. Okay, and there's still some remnants of that. For example, this is a pipe that descended in my family. This is a Three Fires pipe. I'm not putting it together because it's only used for ceremony. But this represents the Three Fires element of the Confederacy over here. A long line coming over here to this pewter band. And if you look at the tip, I'll bring it up closer for, I don't know. There's a star representing the morning star that represents the Abenaki people. And then this is east-west winds that connect them. I also have other legacy of it. This is a covenant chain from the Treaty of Ganawagi. Ganawagi was the capital of the Great Council Fire. That's a Mohawk reserve that is right next to Montreal. So there's all of this, wonder that lies in back of what we think about when we think about Native people here. So it was envisioned basically as a longhouse, and it wasn't only the Haudenosaunee or Iroquois that had longhouses. We did too. There's a 120-foot long by 60-foot wide one, a mile and a half from my house in Swan. So everybody dwells within the house in comfort and enjoy together. And they are warmed both internally and externally by fires. There's a fence. That is a boundary between the Great Council Fire and everybody else. And so beyond the fence, that's where adventure happens, okay? There's a whole series of core values that I really into at all. but we have condolence, and that's addressing the feelings before business. The British
You
always
terrible
were
backgrounds.
accepted with the fact that everybody had to talk, and hang out, play games, gamble before we got to working on
When we were talking,
representatives of the council. But
that
the other step
was
is
hard.
that if you bring anger, you bring irritation, you bring partisanship into the council, it won't work. So what you had to do is play lacrosse and get all bloody together. Sometimes I think that would be a really nice thing to do in Washington. Conservation standardizing all of the alliance protocols, so you were never felt as though you were in a foreign land. Common signal, that's quiet, or quite quiet, or quite. These are all variations that you hear across the whole Great Council Fire. So it kept everybody, if you were canoeing and another canoe came up, you raise your hand and say, quite, you would pull over, make tea, and enjoy each other. If you raise your hand, say quite quiet, and the other person said second, you had a couple options. One was to ignore them. The other was to say, let's just be friends, go over and make tea, or you're going to have to kill them. Now, the whole system was maintained by Wampum. This is the mnemonic system here. So these are some of the symbols that we have on them. And so what you did is if you had to bring a message to a council for war, let's say Missisquoi was attacked, they would make up a belt. You would sing the message into it with the keeper or the runner right next to it and two warriors. Okay. They would have to memorize it word by word. If they got one word wrong, they could be executed for that because they had to be perfect memory of it. So they would send it off, and what you do is then you'd make up other belts. The message would be then transmitted to the people in the next village, and 5 people would go out from that one of these, another 5. So it's like those old 1950s, remember chain reactions, remember Walt Disney and stuff like that. It's nice talking with people of my age so we can all, do popular culture together. So that's how it works. Now, after 1800, that's the period when the state of Vermont, and everybody says the Abenaki, had fled. Well, because of a bunch of stress that we'll talk about at the very end. The Abenakis had to either emigrate, they had to hide basically go up into the areas that were not being occupied by Euro-Americans, or what's called identity transfer or passing. So a lot of people passed into a Franco-Vermont identity during the 19th century. So one of the big questions, remember there's cultural legitimacy. Did everybody leave from Vermont, or was there stuff here? So, Away the Seeded Earth, and I've actually got a whole book on that. 7 Sisters, if you're interested, Amazon, of course. We didn't do 7 Sisters, that's way too simplistic. So here's our modern, which these are all existing today. This were used for recognition purposes. We had Richfield systems that were watered very specifically by vernal flooding. We had simple mountain platform systems and agroforestry, all working together. And this is a biocultural model of a certain, that's a Brownington branch in the Northeast Kingdom. Here's a nice photograph. It just shows how I evolved. At first, I was very excited about Aunt Sarah because she's wearing wampum here. So I looked at that and I published this as, oh, there's a great picture of wampum. Then I went, duh, here she is in the middle of her sunflower field. These are Abenaki varieties of sunflowers. And then there's biometry that you can use, photogrammetry, that you can actually, this is a cornfield, you can measure how high the corn is. So these are standard, we're assuming these are standard cedar 4-foot posts. So we're looking at corn that is this high, not like that. So there's a huge amount of detail that we can get and things like this. We've got 56 different varieties of indigenous seeds from the Wabanaki area. Many of these are endangered. The Seeds of Renewal project that I had as well. I'm directors of too many things. We've accumulated these, and we are in the process of sharing these with all kinds of other indigenous communities throughout the Wabanaki area. Just a few examples. These are corn varieties. Only Abenaki rose. This one here gets up about this high. Gaspé is about the size of a big crabgrass plant. Okay, but it matures in 45 days. So there's a lot of interesting variety here. Here's just a few of the Métis bush beans. Let's see, shade sacrament. You see how small the beans are? Has a little teeny bean. This is from the south shore of the St. Lawrence River. It is the shortest growing bean that we have any record of anywhere. We can get two plantings of this bean out a year, and it is very frost resistant as well. Here's squashes and pumpkins. This is my favorite. In my opinion, this is the most delicious squash in the world. A little bit of our agricultural system. This is a co-os mound system. You'll notice the mound is about this big. The mounds grow with the family because the young are expected to weave all the way to the center. So when you start with little 3-year-olds, your mound's about this big. So these are teenagers in here. Okay, and then this is a wigwam frame is set up because remember we didn't do Three Sisters. This is a platform mound. This is actually a platform built out with specialized soils that have been transported over to it to manage fertility and moisture transmission, drainage and things like that. 77 of these mounds are on a platform. This is full Maya civilization grade agricultural geo-intensive manipulation, if you want to go technical. This is a standard co-os mound because remember the corn is small. You can't do the Three Sisters with the beans going up it. Okay, so what we do is we plant the corn around the outside, the beans go up the middle, and then the squash will radiate out from there. So here's 3 generations collecting corn and squash at the Burlington Intervale Center. And cooking as well. That's our green corn ceremony that we just had. You're far enough east in Vermont here, so you should be within the geographic limits of beanhole dinners. I know Danville has it and a couple others over here. But this is a traditional Wabanaki and Abenaki way of cooking. It's called earth oven. You dig a big hole in the ground, line it with rocks, fire it. Takes 6 to 8 hours to get the proper amount of coals in it. Then you put your coals, your beans, the bean pot in the hole, cover it up, leave it overnight, and they're ready to go the next morning. Delicious. So these are some of the bio parts, so the biocultural, magnificence of the Abenakis and their neighbors, and especially in this area. Now let's think about the material arts, okay, a little bit. So if you want to think about these, this is probably one of the simpler forms of the arts. These are called makuks, or birch bark containers. We've got simple ones over here that we use for collecting maple syrup. This one here is a little trinket box, and this is a real nice one that is actually marked. It's labeled 1830 and MHU on it. This came from Colchester. So this is very important to nail down birch bark container manufacture in Vermont to a specific area and a specific date. So we really love things that are properly dated. Because remember, there's always that question. Are these things indigenous to Vermont? So we're really lucky when we get these. These are examples of baskets. These are historic phase ones. These are about as early as you can get in this area. This is from Vernon, Vermont. So this isn't too far from here. And actually it's very similar to some that are of the Nipmuc and other tribes a little bit farther south, because they have these what are called potato stamps. But this is a typical Wabanaki, Abenaki, what's called varying splint. In other words, you got wide ones, narrow, wide, narrow, narrow, wide, same thing. Yeah, very distinctive style of baskets made out of the ash tree, which of course you know is endangered now to the emerald ash borer. Clothing. So here's some examples. This is a nice little shot taken about 1880 in Stowe with the Wabanaki woman's peaked hood, which actually was basically two rectangles sewn together, put on the side, and so it came up like this and then down. There's a little girl wearing that with two distinctive Wabanaki or Abenaki style snowshoes. There's a cut cloth fringe dress that Aunt Sarah is wearing. Here's a couple Missisquoi girls. They're a really cute one. I love their big funky shoes they're wearing. And whatever's got her little doll here. Now, one of the things that we also have to consider is preserved skills. In other words, which ones are descended here locally and which ones have been brought in. Okay, so that's always an important thing. So here's a couple examples of preserve. Jesse LaRock in 1996. This is our earliest Wabanaki or Abenaki revival basket that we have. And this was made for me specifically by Abenaki basket maker Carrie Wood as a harvest basket. So we got that so we can harvest, store our stuff that we harvest in an Abenaki basket. So we have the whole food system, right from indigenous food, seeds, agricultural systems, harvesting with Abenaki tools, and storing in Abenaki baskets. So it's putting systems back together. Here's preserved skills, beadwork. This is beautiful applique beaded panel, wampum belt that I made years ago when I had more time, before I retired. Here's, I do a lot of wampum reading. It's one of my roles as a leader in the Wabanaki Confederacy. And so these are some of the belts and some of the training that I do for the chiefs and tribal elders over in Maine. Now, those are the material arts, but there's also music. So I was playing a little bit of this at the beginning, but we had a music revival at co-ops up in the Newberry, Haverhill area. And this is a bunch of the co-ops ladies. This is my wife, Anna, on the computer. We're teaching Vermont Abenaki songs, okay? Remember, a lot of these songs are not indigenous to this area. So we either sing Wabanaki Confederacy songs because we belong to it in the past, or songs with definite provenance origin here in Vermont. So we've had out of the probably 70 known songs that most Wabanaki people sing, we probably only sing about 15, because those are the ones that we have perfect documentation or permission to be able to sing. Okay. Another big project that we're working on is putting this all back into an Abenaki year. Indigenous people keep a calendar that's driven by natural forces of sun, moon, plant growth, the migration of fish, and other things. And so this is, I don't have a whole lot of time, but this is one of our first ones. This is the Abenaki forgiveness fire ritual. Now, remember I told you that everything that we have to do at the Heritage Center has to have a perfect provenance. Because there are a lot of people that will come and ask, well, where did you get that? And so this is a good example that we use in some of these slides. I ripped off some from some of my other presentations. This is one that actually documents everything that we do, right down to origin, who got it, when we got it. So there's a paper trail. And this is all supported by documentation that we have. So as originated up the Connecticut River Valley, this is a co-os ceremony. Ancestral, in other words, it goes back before living memory. Okay, that's what that means. Then who taught it? We have two teachers. Form of documentation, I learned it. Okay. And the first Vermont performance, that was done way back before 1970. Okay. Modern practice, we do it here. And notes, one of the best documented local examples that we've got. Here's the summer solstice ceremony, or shooting the fire. This is a very wonderful ceremony. It occurs on the summer solstice at solar noon. And what everybody has to do is they take tobacco, breathe into it their best wishes for the rest of the year. Here's my wife Anna holding it up, making a tobacco tie. Then what happens? All the tobacco tires are taken together and they're put into a communal fire. The idea of the spirit of the individual good wishes goes into the communal fire. And you have to be very careful on the timing of this, because remember the arrow has to be shot at solar noon. So get them done, put them in, we got to fire it, because all these have to be partially burned, because the spirit in those has to be in the fire. You can't just have some laying off on the side, okay? Then the person that's been designated an elder to shoot the sunfire arrow has to transfer the flame from the fire to a flame arrow that is exactly at solar noon. It is shot to the sun, taking the prayers of the community to the sky beings for a good rest of the year. Isn't that neat? This is the harvest celebration dinner. This is during the pandemic. We thought we were over with it. So here's everybody with masks, out in the cold. We can't eat inside. We're out under a pavilion, freezing our you-know-what's off on Halloween. So this is, the pandemic is really messed up. We usually have about 90 people coming. What do we got? You're probably 15. Okay. And so here's all the information. Maybe we got pictures of early examples, of the harvest dinner. Now, unfortunately, the picture that I painted you about the Abenaki experience here has been fairly, benign. I'm checking the time. 12:39. Got 20 minutes. Okay. So there has been a lot of trauma on the indigenous people, not only in the far past with the genocide of having whole villages burned, and people being murdered, raped, and so one of the things that is very important is the Abenaki community has suffered from what we call intergenerational trauma. And I didn't even know about this until fairly recently. The idea of intergenerational trauma is that if a family undergoes a huge amount of stress, then spouses will take that out on each other, train their children to use the oppression that occurs within family and take that into their hearts and use it within their own families. And then, so what happens, you see, you've got back in 1790, let's say you've got a trauma, comes at a resentment. Then you've got some other garbage that happens in 1840. Just as it's beginning to quiet down, bam, up it goes again. And then it's, and then bam, bam. So people of my generation still remember the eugenics survey, which traumatized Abenakis terribly. And so the statement that the Indians' wars never ended is the key here, because the Abenakis in Vermont have never had a break. Never, not even today. And so there's, a few periods that are really important. The New England Abenaki Wars, going up to about 1792. Just about the time when Vermont became a state, the Abenakis pretty well gave up. And here in Vermont, and did identity transfer or got the heck out of Dodge. Okay. Then things were fairly quiet through the 19th century. This is the time period of the pirates, the river rats, and the gypsies here in Vermont. Maybe some of you remember your parents talking about the gypsy families that had come into town, and they would sell baskets and medicines and stuff like that. Okay. Well, these were Abenakis. They weren't Romany gypsies. Okay, this was what they call an identity transfer, even though the gypsies were despised terribly. Okay, you better watch out. Did your parents ever say, you better watch out, the gypsies are going to come and get you? Okay, these are, but bad as that was, it was better than being Abenaki. Okay. And this was the era of state-sponsored genocide. So we all like to think of Vermont as, so forgiving of minorities and stuff like that. Well, yes, we can celebrate Alexander Twilight, but at the same time that he was doing what he was doing, the Abenakis were being destroyed, and nobody cares. Okay. So did you ever realize that we had a Vermont Ku Klux Klan? There's the East Barry, Ku Klux Klan right there. Why did they come down? Excuse me, why did they occur? Because of Abenaki and Franco, Vermont, stonecutters that came into Barry and other places. And so my wife's mother, Alice Roy, remembers when she was a little girl, crosses burning on the hills about Barry. Okay, there's a whole hidden history to Vermont. The Franco-Vermont community was almost as despised as the Abenakis. And they still are considered by one anthropologist as the great ethnic underbelly of Vermont. Still discriminated against. So there's a whole story of pain here. And the thing that I dealt with personally was state-sponsored ethnic erasure by the state of Vermont. I call it the Vermont Abenaki Information War from 1995 to 2007. This was the state of Vermont coming up with two basic proposals. First, that the Abenakis are fake. They are genetic, political, and cultural frauds, unconnected to the original Abenakis. And secondly, that they're going to build casinos and take all your land, all your money, and they're going to do land claims and take all your land. So there was this huge promotion of fear of the Abenakis, paid for by the state of Vermont. About $270,000 maybe. There's a lot of debate about that, how much they spent on a disinformation campaign. And I, Jeff Benet, and a couple other people stood up to Howard Dean, Bill Sorrell, Richard Sears, and the whole machine in Montpelier. I was very happily, since I'm a child of the 60s, I got tear gassed by the pigs and stuff like that. When Howard Dean called me one of the two most dangerous radicals in the state. Yeehaw. So there we go. So the position of the state is that the Abenaki cease functioning as a tribe. And so I'm using that one picture very specifically so we can all remember. He was actually cited by the Congress of American Indians as doing genocide against the Vermont Abenakis. So what is all this left to the Abenakis? Well, one of the big hidden legacies of all of this is this graph right here. It was done 2012 to 2016. Now, I'm sure that everybody's familiar with Black Lives Matter and all the protests and concern about race, critical race theory, social justice, and things like that. Okay, just take a look. 14 or more for physical health days in the past month, 14 or more for mental health days. This is the Native American community. We don't have too many Alaska Natives, but probably at least 85% of this number here are Abenakis. 24 and 23. Look at the Hispanic and Black communities. Okay, that is called a wellness gap or a wellness disparity between communities that have a lot of support in the state and a community that has no support in the state. So what is unique about that's causing this this problem? Why are people of Abenaki or Native descent so, twice, or let's see, 7 to 24, 3.5 times more prone to physical health than the African community? It's only the multiracial community even approaches it. This is a legacy of trauma, cultural loss, and identity chaos. And these are some quotes over here that come from a University of Vermont study that was just completed. So when we listen to people talking about, the Abenaki community, like I did just before, and it's really neat, good culture, good art, good stories, good this, that, and the other thing. Now there's this underlying problem right here. Okay, even though the Abenakis got state recognition in 2012, nevertheless, they still are suffering. So how do we remedy that? It's really interesting that the state has no mechanism for doing health for the Abenakis. There are all kinds of huge task force for other minorities. There's hundreds of thousands of dollars apparently are now going into the new Afghan community that's moving in to make sure of their health and their well-being as they move in. It would be interesting if the Abenaki community could snag maybe 100th of that aid that is going to other, modern, I guess, more intriguing, more interesting. I don't know what the reason for the disparity in that is, but we're living with a legacy of genocide right up till, with Howard Dean denying that Indigenous people are who they are. It's even gotten worse. I don't know where I have a slide for that. My battery just died right on the next to last slide, which is good. So one of the big puzzles here is, are we going to try to ask the Euro-American community, such as yourselves, for aid, or can we figure out how to do this ourselves? The Abenaki community has always been on its own. And it's even suffering a little more trauma now with the introduction of critical race theory. Because there's a element of it that's called white proximity. And the Abenakis, like the Asian community, are considered white proximate. And so therefore, if you present white, you are privileged. Okay, and therefore you are an oppressor. And so now the Abenakis, who for years have been ashamed of looking in the mirror and not having a Plains Indian looking back at them, Okay, that's been bad enough. But now an Abenaki that looks into the mirror now sees that they are an oppressor of other people. And this is the latest iteration of this is accusation of proximate to whiteness. Well, the interesting thing is, if they're white, okay, why are they so sick? Okay, why? Look at that, 11%. Okay, statistics here should be a perfect indicator of ethnicity. Okay, and so that's an interesting puzzle. Is how are we going to do it? Well, the Heritage Center and all the things that we've done here. You see, the important thing that we're doing is everything that we do is based on Vermont Abenaki precedent. No Plains Indian, no Pan Indian stuff, no eagle feathers, no stories from Passamaquoddy, nothing. So we've created kind of a safe little island in the middle of chaos that people can come and understand the stuff that I've just shared with you. And so we have basket makers, we have singers that are helping other people, Abenakis to be safe, because we're still not safe. And so here's a good example, only with France. Look at that, just a couple. I did a outcomes assessment. I asked people that are working with the Heritage Center, are we doing anything that's helping you, deal with the generational trauma? This is one of the best quotes, and I'm going to end with this. Before I joined Alnovawi, that's the organization that governs the Heritage Center, okay? I didn't know much about my heritage customs or who I am. I was a very depressed and stressed person. I'm coming out of my shell by drumming and singing. I'm now on a spiritual path with our ancestors. I not only have hardly any stress, but my panic attacks are few and far between. I sleep better and no longer wake up at night with night terrors. I'm no longer depressed. I greet each day with a smile, smudge, and thank the Creator for another day. I feel the ancestors when I go to the Heritage Center. I'm connected to the land in a good way because she's one of our farmers. The people in our group are family. We connect with our ancestors and the land. I used to be ashamed of who I am, but now I'm proud. And with that, I'd like to end, and I'd be glad to take questions, comments, or sarcastic remarks. Okay, so I'm going to vacillate back and forth between the chat in Zoom and hands up here. So there's a hands up in the back.
Does Abenaki use shamans?
Yes. Yes, but there are three types. Oh yes, the question was, do the Abenakis have shamans? Yes, there are three types of shamans that we have. The first is a seer, and a good example of that was Grandmother Doris. Do you want to hear a Grandmother Doris story?
Sure.
All right. My wife was from Barrie, okay? We decided to move in together before we got married because we've both been through divorces. And we want to check each other out for 7 years. Okay. So after she moved up, she was missing her family. So what I decided to do was I was going to have a surprise birthday party for her. So I invited all of her family. They were going to come up to the house. They were going to hide in the house while I took Anna out for a half hour. So I decided to take her to Grandmother Doris for a reading. So Anna comes in. Grandmother Doris is saying, "Oh my God, you're surrounded by your family. Everybody loves you so much, and they're feeling such good thoughts." And Anna is saying, "No, Fred's taking me out for a movie, and then we're going out to dinner." No, they're all right here, and I'm behind Anna. And I go, okay, and she said, "No." And so afterwards, Anna, she said, "Boy, sometimes she's really good, but she sure was off the mark this time." And so I got to go back home and pee. So we went home. Surprise! So that's a Grandmother Doris story. Okay, yes.
Are there young people of Abenaki heritage ready to take on keeping traditions going?
Yes. The question is, are there Abenakis of young young Abenakis that are taking on this tradition. Yes, this organization is open to everybody. So I guess most of the people that come and actually do the ceremonies are about 7 and up. And we have one young man right now who is he's gone through an apprenticeship all through high school, and he is now emerging as the eagle dancer for us. And now we're going to take him over to Passamaquoddy to have the official eagle dance of the Abenaki Confederacy teach him the final nuances of the spirituality that goes with it. So yeah, you can come up through the ranks that way. Let me finish your question. So the second is a healer. Okay, we've got a lot of those. My wife, Anna, is descended from healers. We also have what I call an engineer. That might be a person you might think of as a wizard, a warlock, or a witch. All those terms are all very loaded. But that's a person that manages large-scale spiritual forces and powers for the betterment of his or her people. So those are the 3 types. Okay, back to chat. More questions or comments? Yeah.
I would think isolation would be a difficult. I mean, are there many places where many Abenaki live together so that they begin to support each other and create that kind of community, or are they scattered?
Both.
Okay.
There are 2 very dense Abenaki communities. One is Swanton, Vermont. I am related to 390 people from my great-great-great-grandfather in the Swanton Highgate area. We're just like hobbits up there. Okay. The other area is on both sides of the Connecticut River, the Coas area, Newberry and Haverhill. Most other places are fairly scattered, but there's 2 downtown, Abenaki communities. Yes.
Does the Heritage Center have an Abenaki language?
It does not. We rely on Jesse Bruchak to do the training for our people because he basically works out of Middlebury. Our specialty is that of ceremony and material culture and things like that. So we all work together. So Jesse handles the language, but now we've got 3 people that are like Carrie Wood, the person who's a basket maker, is very proficient in the Abenaki language now. And so she helps us with labeling things and stuff like that. We're trying to switch over. So the Abenaki language first, English second.
I know that Jesse is teaching at Middlebury College Language School in the summer. They now have an Abenaki.
Right. Yeah. We have at the Heritage Center, we have hit several programs, one of which, of course, is history like this. We also have a lot of programs for government as well. So we have racial equity, cultural competency training, a whole series of those type of things. And some of these slides were taken out of the cultural competency training. Yes.
And this is from the Mountain School Firster who are there listening in this evening. One question is, can you say more about the earthworks and stone-built landscapes in this area?
Okay. I don't have any slides for that because I was thinking that Jess Robinson may handle it. The whole question, I'll have to back way up. Okay. The whole question of indigenous earthworks in New England is very controversial. Okay. For a long time, it was believed that such things as cairns. Now, these are structures that can be up to about almost the size of this room, or up to 30 meters long. The stone-built environments. Interesting thing, mostly above 2,000 feet. Okay. There's one school of thought that thinks they are all Euro-Americans. Okay. Or Viking, or the Phoenicians, or St. Brendan the Bold, or anybody but indigenous people. Now, we believe that that is a form of, I don't want to exactly call it racism, but it's weirdness because you notice I'm wearing a bolo tie. I took my degree at the University of Arizona, where out there, and I did my dissertation work on the Maya civilization. Well, out there, indigenous people can pile 2 rocks upon another. Okay, so I come back here and I look at, all these structures, and wow, I've been there, done that. But the paradigm is that indigenous people in this area basically are too primitive, okay, to be able to build earthworks. So earthworks are probably of 3 different types. All right, the first type is these cairns. Oh, my producers are telling me I got to pull back a little bit. Yeah, see my bolo tie? Isn't it nice? Okay. So the first type is a simple cairn. All right. Some of these are linear, on the order of 6 to 8 feet high, maybe 15 to 20 feet wide. So there are about 150 of those in Vermont, and some quite close to here. The next are stone underground structures. This is like calendar 1, calendar 2 that are all right in your neck of the woods down here. These are structures that are about this wide, have 5-ton stone lintels on the top of them. Okay, and those are sometimes thought of as root cellars. Well, radiocarbon dates from one of them, and Putney came back at 900 AD. Okay, but still you won't hear the archaeological community talking about that. If you're interested, I have a whole book on that, Reclaiming the Ancestors. Okay, you want to hear about it? There's a whole big section. I'm not here to promote my books now, but there's 2 paradigms in operation, one looking at things from a native perspective, one from a Euro-American. I'm an archaeologist by training, but I consider myself a recovering archaeologist. Okay. The third type of structures is observatory. These are flat stone structures that generally will face south and east. And they have flat tops with small pebbles on the tops. You can turn that, helps a lot. My retina will survive that. Okay, and so these were used probably for either dancing platforms or ceremony, because they are great big boulders and stones to build them up, but the top is flat with little stones about the size of your thumb up to about a good sized pebble. That would be comfortable for a moccasin foot. Oftentimes they will be on a hillside. They'll be up here. There'll be a big amphitheater where a large number of people could watch from below. So you've got the person up here looking up at the rise of the sun, set of the sun, or moon or other planets. So these are very interesting structures, and they're well known. There's a whole organization called the New England Antiquities Research Association, NERA, that dedicates itself to these. So if you want to go online, NERA, but the NERA people are a mix of people that believe these are indigenous Native American, and some believe that they're Phoenicians. So we have a good time at the conferences. Okay, yes.
Could you say something about the museum that we talked about before the presentation, the possible museum that you're interested in?
Oh, yeah. What we're doing now is we have the Ethan Allen Homestead, interestingly enough, has given us the potential of the whole second floor of their barn. I don't know if any of you have been to the Homestead Museum, but it's really interesting that I don't know whether the Morrill Homestead is suffering from this, but there's a huge disinterest in what are called dead white heroes. And in the modern, well, we all know how that is all happening. So what they have done is they're working with us to kind of decolonize it a bit and working together. So it's a useful form of mutual predation. Okay, I guess you could say that before we entered into any agreements, we researched. No, Ethan Allen did not take any land from the Abenakis. It was his nasty brother, Ira. We won't get into Ira Allen and the Onion River. But the land is exactly on the same as Betty Wentworth transferred as the land that this building and all of your houses are on. So it is no more cursed or less cursed than any of your houses in terms of stealing from the Abenakis, okay? So that was the first element. Then they have given us a 40 by 120 foot enclosed area. They've done all the building engineering assessment. So we're going to put a heritage center up there. It's going to cost between $2 and $5 million because we have things ranging from full-size birch bark canoes, things like this that have to be, those of you that are associated with museums know that this is leather and birch bark and, leather, birch bark. There's birch bark underneath this. There's leather, quill work, and hair. All of these are the most easily degraded type of artifacts. So that just a case to hold a lot of this stuff, that size, will be about $70,000. Okay, just to get it, the negative air pressure, positive air pressure and all of that. And an elevator, oh my God, the cost of a OSHA and Americans for Disabilities Act, $60,000 will be able to get disabled up to the second floor. So we've been working with Senator Leahy and his office and other organizations to be able to start accumulating that money.
Are you doing fundraising or?
We've had a succession of people who have promised us between $500,000 and $2 million that back off at the last minute. So we're not really doing fundraising. We're just hoping to break through, that. I think the period is ripe for that now. BIPOC, the eye needs support in the state. And okay, we have to go to Zoom, and then I'll be with you.
How can organizations that have not historically worked with the Abenaki community best learn about and incorporate the community into their work?
Well, all the different tribes are working to establish different relationships with the state and local organizations and schools. The difference about the Heritage Center, you see, our center is not normally, we don't generally do this, come out and talk to the Euro-American public. Our goal is inward facing, okay? We are there for the Abenaki community to teach them the heritage. So we are not primarily an external educational or, we don't do protests or flash mobs or anything. So, we don't really have that, what's called cultural capital, to really be on the Vermont radar screen like other communities. We do not see cultural capital. That's why, you probably never heard of us. Okay. And yet you see a lot of pictures for a lot of stuff we've done. Okay. That's because, we're trying to work. Now, I do work occasionally with organizations such as yourself because I really like to work with the Vermont Humanities Council, and they're supporting this. And I came once as a tourist about 30 years ago here. All I remember was peaky roofs when I was young. So I wanted to come back. And of course, the honorarium was also very helpful as well. So there's a pecuniary interest in that as well. So, but there's many other organizations. But if you want to go online, you can find us. We're almabiwi.org, or you can just look up Indigenous Heritage Center. But we're not here really to teach like this, because you see the lore that I just gave you is very deep, very complex, and shoots roots in 50 different directions. Any one of those slides I could do a whole lecture on. And so when you guys in the back asked me to do something, to go over 400 years in an hour, that's my best attempt. Okay. But bringing up some of the contemporary issues. Oops, stand back. Any other questions or thoughts? Yes.
Where the beads come from?
These are my personal collection.
But where did they originate?
I work with all the antique dealers in the whole Abenaki area.
But I mean, the beads themselves, before they were created,
Oh, you mean this? This?
The seeds and the,
Oh, okay, yeah, these are seed beads. This is these are European, probably from Murano in Italy, the beads, and they're on what's called trade cloth. Stroud, that was a wool cloth that was made in Stroud water in England in the 18th and early 19th century. So the designs are indigenous, the materials are European.
your,
And so another good example is this finger woven sash. This is made in a technique equivalent, let's see if I can get there. Wow, that's really weird. Okay, so this is a blanket that was unraveled by hand, and then it was finger woven. Finger weaving is the same thing as braiding. You braid with 3 pieces. This has about 150, 140 strands to it. A native way of doing things. So each of these has its own story. Here is a crooked knife. Kind of weird looking thing. It's held like this. And indigenous people carve toward themselves. Euro-Americans carve away. So this is set up and it's a very beautiful chip carving. Lots of detail on it. So all of these things here, this is just about 1/100th of my collection. My garage is filled with totes. Probably halfway back this room, about that high, ready to go. All we need is a couple $1 million. So that's, everything has its own story. And that's what we do. Now, there's a question here. Yes.
When you mentioned that information about Howard Dean, I can't tell you how shocked I was to hear that. And I'm wondering why, you sort of answered the question before here, but why was nothing ever printed, said, talked about this, of who this guy really was? It's just, nobody knew anything of what you're saying about him. And I'm wondering why.
Because the Abenaki perspective is unwanted, unneeded. I fought Howard Dean the whole time, tooth and nail, and there were a few others of us to try to preserve our people against, the genocide. That's full-blown genocide. Denying a people their identity based on political and economic motivation. But it's hard. Vermont is very set in its ways politically. We have our own icons in terms of, I guess you could say left, right, liberal, conservative, and things like that. And all these things are woven into this tapestry of politics, including, the exclusion of the Abenakis in new initiatives with the newer minorities and things like that. It's all politics. And I'm retired. I don't do that anymore. I burned myself out. I lost all my hair and got, a little mess in my heart when the electrics, went up. There's too much stress. 20 years of fighting the state without any real support. But the truth is out there, and it's at some point, I've got a book. But Vermont is not politically ready for it yet.